I guess you've probably seen in the New York Times and in the Guardian in the last couple of days that those newspapers have called for some sort of plea bargain or clemency for Edward Snowden. What is your sense as to whether or not he would be agreeable to something like that? Would he be agreeable to coming back to the United States, admitting some guilt in exchange for some leniency?
I can't get into plea bargain negotiations really on the air, but he certainly would love to come back to the United States if the conditions were right. And I think some sort of pardon or amnesty would be appropriate. Again, if there were conditions attached to that amnesty, that's not something I can speculate about really, but he would definitely be amenable under conditions such as a pardon or amnesty to coming back.
Would he accept anything less than a full pardon or amnesty at this point, or he's just not interested in talking about that?
No one has contacted his attorneys, and the Justice Department certainly knows how to get a hold of us if it would like to talk about these issues, which I would be glad to run by my client. I can't say for sure right now. I don't think he's committed any crime, and I don't think he should. I think he's been punished quite enough already by being, stripped of his statehood and basically exiled for the past 6 months. I think he certainly has paid a very high price already for the amount of good he has done the public through his disclosures, good that has now been recognized not only by a federal court judge, 2 federal court judges, and a White House internal handpicked review panel, and now both the New York Times and the Guardian editorial boards said that he should be able to come back and really be able to resume his reform efforts immediately here in the U.S., and not have to serve any kind of jail time. That would not be appropriate.
And what other information does he have that might be of interest to the United States government? Because one thing that we heard from a security official over at the National Security Agency, pretty top official over there, said that he would be interested in some sort of amnesty for Edward Snowden in exchange for his data. Does he have some of this still in his possession? Would he be open to providing everything that he has back to the federal government in exchange for some sort of deal?
As far as I know, he no longer possesses any data and has not had possession of any data since he left Hong Kong for Russia. So that would not really pertain. However, I do think he has other things to bring to bear in the conversation that the government might want to initiate, and they know how to find myself and Ben Weisner of the ACLU if they want to start a conversation about amnesty or pardon.